fire within. The retirement papers felt heavy in James Carter's hands, their crisp edges catching the fluorescent light of the fire station's locker room. 35 years of service, reduced to a few sheets of bureaucratic formality. The familiar scent of smoke, that peculiar mix of ash, sweat, and duty, had permanently embedded itself in the metal lockers surrounding him, a reminder of countless calls, countless saves, and the few he couldn't reach in time. His hands trembled as he reached for his coffee cup, but it wasn't age causing the shake. At 59, he was still as steady as ever on the job, could still carry a victim down 6 flights of stairs without wavering. No, this tremor was different. It had started 3 months ago, around the same time the urges began, around the same time the dreams started changing. The lighter in his pocket seemed to burn against his thigh, an ember demanding attention. Carter pulled it out, watching the flame dance as he flicked it open. On, off, on, off. The ritual had become unconscious lately, like breathing. Each tiny flame sent a shiver of something down his spine. Not fear, never fear. He'd spent too long mastering fire to fear it. This was more like hunger. "Hey, Carter, structure fire on Oak Street." He snapped the lighter shut, shoving it deep into his pocket as shame flooded through him. The surge of adrenaline was normal. He'd felt it thousands of times over his career. But the flash of disappointment that someone might get to the fire before him, that was new. Wrong, like a corruption of everything he'd stood for. As he suited up, muscles moving through practiced motions, Carter caught his reflection in the mirror. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, his blue eyes looked brown, and his face seemed to hold a smile he wasn't wearing. He blinked, and everything was normal again. Just tired, he told himself. The insomnia was getting worse. The drive to the fire was torture. Every turn of the siren sent shivers of anticipation down his spine. He found himself hoping the fire would still be raging when they arrived, imagining the beautiful dance of flames against the night sky. The thought made him sick. This wasn't him. Couldn't be him. "I save lives," he whispered to himself, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I stop fires. I don't want them to burn. I don't want to watch them burn." "But they're so beautiful when they do," whispered a voice that wasn't quite his own. It had started as barely a thought, a stray notion he could dismiss. Now it had texture, tone, a presence that seemed to curl around his thoughts like smoke. The fire was already under control when they arrived. Carter felt simultaneously relieved and disappointed. The conflict churned his stomach. Back at the station, he found 3 burnt matches in his pocket. He didn't remember lighting them, just like he didn't remember getting up last night, though his wife mentioned finding him standing in the backyard, staring at the neighbor's house. That night, like every night recently, sleep refused to come. Carter lay awake, listening to his wife's steady breathing beside him. The clock's red numbers cast a hellish glow on the ceiling, 2:17 a.m. Then he heard the sirens, another fire 6 blocks away. His phone hadn't rung, he wasn't on call. But somehow, he'd known it was coming, had been waiting for it. The revelation came on a Tuesday, during hour 14 of another sleepless night. Carter sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by newspaper clippings of the recent fires. His wife had finally convinced him to take some personal days. His behavior was becoming erratic, she said. The dark circles under his eyes frightened her. He traced the pattern of fires on a map, something tugging at his subconscious. Each fire had started between 2 and 4 a.m., each one progressively larger than the last. But it was the locations that made his hands shake. Every single fire formed a perfect spiral around his house. "Just a coincidence," he muttered, but his voice sounded hollow in the empty kitchen. Then he noticed something else. Every fire occurred on nights his wife said he'd been sleepwalking. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his fitness tracker data. The nights of the fires showed unusual activity, walks lasting exactly 47 minutes each time. "We're getting better at it," the voice whispered. "More efficient." Carter's coffee cup slipped from trembling fingers, shattering on the linoleum. In the puddle of brown liquid, he caught a reflection, just for a moment, of a face grinning back at him. Not his face. He knew that face. He ran to the garage, tearing through boxes until he found his old case files. The photo in the Garrett Reed file was grainy, but the eyes, those same brown eyes he'd been seeing in mirrors, were unmistakable. No, he whispered. No, no, no. But the evidence was overwhelming. In his basement, he found a hidden box of accelerants that he didn't remember buying. His work boots, cleaned meticulously after each fire, had traces of ash in the treads that matched the chemical signature from the investigation reports he wasn't supposed to have access to. The security footage from the convenience store near the last fire showed him buying matches at 2:17 a.m. In the grainy video, he moved with a strange, eager grace that wasn't his own. The clerk's statement mentioned him humming an old song about fire. Carter hadn't hummed in years. "You're a better host than I could have dreamed," Garrett's voice purred. "Your reputation keeps anyone from looking too closely. Your expertise makes every fire a masterpiece. We're artists, James." Carter ran to the bathroom, splashing water on his face. In the mirror, his reflection moved a second too slowly, wearing an expression of pure joy that didn't match his horror. "How?" he demanded. The memory surfaced like smoke. Garrett Reed's last moments in the warehouse fire 15 years ago. Carter had grabbed his hand, tried to pull him to safety. Reed's fingers had locked around his wrist as he died, that terrible grin never leaving his face. "I'll show everyone the beauty of the flames," he'd said. Not a threat, a promise. The next memory wasn't his own. The sensation of his spirit tearing free in the heat of the fire, seeking anchor in the strong, capable body of the firefighter who'd tried to save him. 15 years of waiting, of gathering strength, of slowly seeping into Carter's psyche until the boundaries between them began to blur. Carter's phone buzzed. Another fire reported, this one 3 blocks away. His hands itched for the lighter in his pocket. He could already taste the smoke. During his lunch break, Carter found himself in the station's records room, pulling more files about Reed. The warehouse fire report was thin. Garrett Reed, 34, died of smoke inhalation and burns. Local pyromaniac, suspected in dozens of fires but never caught. The report noted that even as he died, Reed was trying to light another match. The next fires were larger. Carter was always first on scene, his intuition praised by colleagues who didn't notice the burn marks on his hands or the way his eyes reflected the flames too eagerly. Marks he couldn't explain. Time started slipping away from him. His wife mentioned more sleepwalking, muttering about flames. The voice grew stronger. "They don't understand," it whispered during quiet moments at the station. "Fire cleanses. Fire transforms. You feel it too, don't you, James? The way it calls to you now. The way it always called to me." The night before his retirement, Carter found himself driving to the abandoned warehouse where Reed had died. The gas can in his trunk felt like destiny. Fighting against his own hands as they splashed fuel across the floor, Carter finally understood. He wasn't losing his mind. He was losing his soul. "Get out!" he screamed into the empty building, voice echoing off walls still scarred from the fire that claimed Reed's life. "Get out of my head!" Reed's laughter echoed in his skull. "I've been waiting 15 years for this moment. For someone who truly appreciates the flames. Someone strong enough to contain my spirit, experienced enough to get close to the biggest fires. Do you know how beautiful it's going to be?" Carter fought. With everything he had, he fought. Memories of every life he'd saved, every fire he'd stopped, became weapons against Reed's influence. He felt the spirit weaken, felt his control returning. The lighter slipped from his fingers. The gas can clattered to the floor. Then came the sirens. The security cameras caught everything. The gas can, the matches, his colleagues' faces as they led him away in handcuffs. Evidence linked him to the other fires. Traces of accelerant, boot prints, timing. His story about possession fell on deaf ears. Even his spotless record couldn't save him from what the cameras had captured. Now Carter sits in his cell, staring at the ceiling. He won. He beat Reed's spirit, saved the warehouse, saved future victims. The price was his freedom, his reputation, everything he'd built over 35 years of service. But at least it's over. In the polished metal of the toilet bowl, his reflection smiles with someone else's face, brown eyes gleaming with triumph. His fingers play with a match he doesn't remember smuggling in. "We have all the time in the world now," Garrett whispers. "Just you and me and all these beautiful dreams of fire. And when they finally let you out, oh, the things we'll create together."